and they would bring together the 5 like disparate points of Somali, which really I think at that point was determined if you were ethnically Somali, and gather it together into a country. There was no vote on this. No one, from what I can tell or have read, besides these dudes in the nationalist movement, wanted to be a country. It appears that most of the clans were quite happy not being a country. And yet we have a flag, so now we have a country. Hey y'all, we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Kristen.
And I'm Dr. Erin.
And you are very, very welcome to our corner of the internet for this week's installment of the Colonizers World Tour. This month, we are talking about Italian colonies. Lest you think Italy did not colonize anything. Oh, nay. They didn't do it when everybody else was doing it.
And they weren't.
But they still
they weren't
did it.
Yeah, they weren't super good at it.
Oh no, they were pretty terrible.
Yeah.
But there's a couple. Fear not. So we're going to be talking about Ethiopia. Then we're going to be talking about we're talking about Somalia, then Ethiopia, then Libya, and then Italy itself. Yeah. Because the other thing is that Italy has kind of fallen out of contemporary conversation. And we have a feeling you don't know how Italy works, because we don't really know how Italy works. So we're going to be talking about that as well. But in terms of Somalia, darling Erin, what did you know before we started our massive Googling?
Yeah, not much. Not much at all. I could have told you it was in Africa. I would have told you they have a problem with pirates.
Yep. Thank you, Captain Phillips.
Thank you, Captain Phillips. We often say the phrase, when we recorded, back in the olden days when we recorded all our YouTube videos on Zoom, we used to use the phrase, you are the captain now.
When we switched hosts.
When we would make each other hosts. But that's it. That is all. I certainly did not know that Italy was involved in it at all until we chose it for Colonizers World Tour. So I had a steep learning curve. How about yourself?
I knew about Black Hawk Down. And I knew a little bit because the American involvement in Somalia is why we didn't go to Rwanda when the genocide was happening. Oh. So, Clinton didn't want another PR nightmare like Black Hawk Down. So that's why he didn't show up for the nearly 1 million slaughtered Rwandans. So I've known that.
Yeah.
I've known that famines are a hobby, essentially, and that it is on the very horn of Africa. Yeah. But beyond that, not a whole lot. I do know that none of my Kenyan friends will go there. That is we don't talk about Kevin. We don't talk about.
We don't go to Somalia. Yeah.
But that's it. That's kind of it. So I learned a ton, including that they were never actually a country, which was just a delightful discovery explaining what's happening now.
Okay.
So let's get into it. As we said, let's go to the map, pals. As we said, they are on the Horn of Africa in East Africa. They touch Ethiopia, Djibouti, and Kenya. They go out into the Indian Ocean. There was, for a while, a problem with pirates. It is not as much anymore, and we should kind of let that stereotype go because it's not a thing anymore. There's just about over 12 million people, although a bunch of sites put 1,000 asterisks next to this that are so taking a census population in Somalia is nearly impossible, but this is our best guess. Also, Somaliland, which is the top bit of the chicken bone shaped thing happening, does not consider itself part of Somalia. But the United Nations considers it part of Somalia. So the United Nations would say that there's 15-ish million people because they add Somaliland. Somaliland is like, deuces, we're independent. But for some reason, the UN doesn't consent to that. Reasons I'm still unclear on. So as you can understand, this is a complicated one. The capital and only major city is, well, not major, only major, but the capital and like the big hub is Mogadishu. Somaliland has its own capital, which we forgot to type, and I'm now blanking on. But it is, again, not recognized by anybody but themselves.
Hargeisa.
Hargeisa, there we go.
Hargeisa with a G.
Hargeisa.
Yeah.
So that's the capital of Somaliland, and the other big country either in or outside Somalia. I haven't had this much trouble talking about a country since the first time I started explaining Northern Ireland. God, love it.
Somaliland is a trip, man, and like just watch Geography Now's explanation of Somaliland, and it'll help you understand that it's an autonomous region that the UN doesn't recognize as a country, but like Palestine does. It's a whole thing.
Oh my gosh, humans are fun. So there's a couple different languages. Somali, which is acoustic language, is the official one according to the 2012 Federal Charter. Transitional Federal Charter, I really should say. And then there is also Arabic is allowed. People still speak Italian. You can still see in the Somali language and in Ethiopian, by the way, some real kind of hangovers from the couple decades that Italy hung out. And English, lots of people speak it because you have to these days, unfortunately. Or fortunately, ethnic and indigenous, Somali is 85%. People who identify as Somali are 85%. Then Bantu and other non-Somali is about 15%. It's super, super homogeneous in terms of being Somali. It is not homogeneous in terms of your clan and who you claim clan with. There are 4 largest clans that Hawiye, Darude, Rahewen, and Isak. But gosh, and that is significantly more popular and more important to a lot of people we are discovering politically to be part of a clan than to be part of Somalia. And there's a real specific hierarchy there. Currency, they use the shilling. It is currently 578 Somali shillings to $1. Interestingly, though, they are not a cash-based society at all. Even though they struggle with technology and a million other things because of access and electricity and everything else, most people pay through their phones. They pay through apps on their phones and they text each other money, and that's kind of how it happens. And that's been happening for a long time, and I would imagine that's partially because of the decentralization of the central bank, the destruction of the central bank, I should say, during one of the many civil wars in the last little bit. As of this moment, it is considered a federal republic of Somalia. As of this moment. It's a federal parliamentary republic with 18 regions. And here's the note we'll tell you that we've typed here. We'll tell you that I'm reading from. We'll tell you everything you need to know. Regional and local governing bodies continue to exist and control various areas of the country, including the self-declared Republic of Somaliland in northwestern Somalia. So does that sound like a really governable country to you? It does not sound like that to us. And also, there's the Al-Shabaab of it all, which is why a lot of people know Somali's name right now. As of 2022, a significant portion of the country is controlled by Al-Shabaab. In 2012, there was hope that they had eradicated Al-Shabaab. And what Al-Shabaab did was kind of lay fallow for a year or two and then come back and just take over everything, which was super exciting for them. So, also a note about Somaliland. Again, it is not recognized by the UN. It is formerly British Somaliland. That was the top bit. The side bit was Italian Somaliland. And Somaliland declared its independence in 1991. They have their own currency, their postal service, and a visa. You cannot get into Somaliland with a visa from Somalia.
Everything's fine.
So mostly the religion is Sunni Islam, and that is still a thing. Obviously, where Al-Shabaab controls, their version of Islam is dominant, which is a real bastardization of Sunni and Shiite and a whole bunch of other things that they've just kind of created for themselves. But people with consent to practice, majority-wise, practice Sunni. I don't really know how to talk about the economy because, there isn't one. And it's not anyone's fault. They just They don't really have a unified government either because of this clan situation. So this is when I would actually like to talk about the flag and explain that they were never a country, because I think that will help everyone understand this. I learned this from the book, James Ferguson's book, The World's Most Dangerous Country, which I'm reviewing this upcoming Sunday on Abby Research Reads, our sister channel. And he explained that the reason there is a 5-pointed star on the Somali flag is that in the 50s, there was a big nationalist movement. And we all wanted to be Somali. And all is about 20 dudes who got together and decided that there would be a pan-Somali movement. And they would bring together the 5 disparate points of Somali, which really I think at that point was determined if you were ethnically Somali, and gather it together into a country. There was no vote on this. No one, from what I can tell or have read, besides these dudes in the nationalist movement, wanted to be a country. It appears that most of the clans were quite happy not being a country. And yet we have a flag, so now we have a country. And in so many ways, they just never stood a chance. They never stood a chance. In the book, they say that one of the proverbs of Somalia is that the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse may go everywhere else on the planet, but they live in Somalia. Mm-hmm. Because it's so, and I can't imagine trying to make anything stable. First of all, geographically, it's weird. Second of all, you have the clans. And third of all, now you've got Al-Shabaab. And what do you even possibly do? So 2012 was a real moment of hope that has been slightly dimmed, I think. And then I actually couldn't find any data on how they dealt with COVID, which tells me that it went poorly. So it's not great, but it was also never, this is one of the things we see a lot in colonization. Rwanda wasn't a country before the Belgians showed up and made it a country. Yeah. So we're seeing, in a certain way, what's different about Somalia is that a couple of their own ethnic countrymen tried to do it. But it doesn't appear that anyone in a majority consented to that. So when we try to talk about an economy and everything, I mean, Somalia, a lot of the tribes are still very nomadic, and they are agriculture and livestock herders. So how do you take semi-nomadic people and put them into a stationary government? Spoiler alert, you don't. And so what does this all look like? They have some stuff in Mogadishu, but it hasn't spread outside Mogadishu. And with Al-Shabaab terrorizing the countryside, to be completely frank, I don't know when it would. This is also when we should say that the Somali diaspora probably only rivals the Irish diaspora in terms of its reach and strength in its national identity. And so we don't have any category ever to talk about diaspora because most of these countries don't have as a significant one, to be honest. But gosh, Somalia's diaspora is not messing around. And it is really interesting to watch some interviews with Somali refugees and asylum seekers and how they talk about not actually wanting to go back until there's a functioning country. Mm-hmm. But they carry their country in their heart with them because other people took it from them. And what does that all kind of look like? Just really, really interesting. So that's it for my bits of the sunshine and rainbows that is the current nation of Somalia. I'm not even going to pretend I'm handing over to Erin for good news, but I'm handing over to Erin for more information. For
different news, different information. Yeah, I mean, in terms of demographics, Somalia scores just real low on things. Poor governance is part of the problem, protracted internal conflict, underdevelopment, economic decline, social and gender inequality, environmental degradation. You know all of these things already. But despite the civil war and the several famines, they have a very high mortality rate. So they have a high fertility rate in a large proportion of people. I misread. So they have a high mortality rate because of the famine and the civil war, but they have rapid population growth. So there's a high fertility rate. There's a lot of people who are of a reproductive age. So each generation is larger than the prior one, which often happens in conflict zones because the older people are the ones that die in conflict as well. So more than 60% of Somalia's population is younger than 25.
That's insane.
The median age is 18 and a half. We've seen this in other African countries that we've covered as well. because of a lot of these things, protracted violent conflicts, not a very high life expectancy, lack of access to contraception, all of these things. The fertility rate is among the world's highest at 6 children per woman. Per woman, 6 children. A rate that has decreased very little since the 1970s. Life expectancy is 55 and the contraceptive prevalence rate is only 7%. So this is, really similar to a lot of other parts of this region and on this continent. So it's not surprising. They have one of the lowest school primary enrollment rates. Just over 40% of children are in school. One of the highest youth unemployment rates. All of these things mean it's very, very difficult to move out of the situations that they find themselves in. During the 2 decades of conflict that followed the fall of the Siad regime in 1991, hundreds of thousands of Somalis fled their homes. Today, Somalia is the world's 3rd highest source country for refugees after Syria and Afghanistan. So thanks, America, for helping with those. It's just a lot of problems. And then when we get into the human rights of it all, it's just like, obviously, given what I just told you about demographics, human rights are going to be real low on the bar. The Amnesty 2021 report shares that there is ongoing violence against all civilians from all parties in the conflict. The right to freedom of expression is often suppressed. Journalists are killed. This is what happens in conflict. I did find a little bit of information about the COVID response, and You're correct. It wasn't great. It was horrible, and as of December 2021, only 5% of Somalis were vaccinated. So, we've been hearing about vaccine inequity in terms of distribution and access globally. This is not surprising. Hundreds of thousands of people were displaced by COVID. In Somaliland, authorities continue to censor journalists and critics while carrying out large-scale forced evictions.
Cool.
Al-Shabaab is still a problem. They no longer have control of Mogadishu, but the areas that they do have control of create a lot of problems, and they continue to carry out attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure.
And also into Kenya, which is why you may have heard of them recently.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that Kenya has no patience to help Somalia is because of Al-Shabaab.
Yeah, they changed their tactics once they lost a lot of actual ground in Somalia and started carrying out international attacks, mostly in Kenya. And we'll get into some of the politics of that in our piece of art video tomorrow that we're talking about, because it talks a lot more about this transition of Al-Shabaab. The history of colonization is a fascinating one. I would hesitate to say it was like fully colonized in a lot of ways, although, Italian is spoken. Certainly when we get to Ethiopia, they never really colonized Ethiopia. They occupied
They gave it a yeoman's.
They tried a couple times. They occupied it for 5 years, but they did actually rule Somalia for a while. So this part of Africa was always a huge part of trade expeditions because of its access along the Indian Ocean. It's right on the Gulf of Aden, which goes into eventually the canal, and trade route access all over the Mediterranean and that part of Africa. So trade expeditions occurred at various times between the 5th and 12th centuries. Between CE 800 and 1100, immigrant Muslim Arabs and Persians set up coastal trading posts along the Gulf of Aden and in the Indian Ocean. So then there was a huge connection between Somalia and the Arab Peninsula, because it's literally just right there. There's a lot of kind of commonality between parts of Somalia and Yemen, because it's just literally right over the Gulf of Aden. Ethnic Somalis have lived for centuries throughout the Horn of Somalia. as Kristen said, they practiced nomadic pastoralism in the north and agricultural pastoralism in the south. However, their political borders were imposed by European colonial powers. They partitioned the ethnic Somali enclaves into parts that became modern-day Ethiopia, Kenya, and Djibouti. Parts of the north were administered as British Somaliland. Much of the south and kind of the bit of the Horn became Italian Somalia. When these two former colonies were merged into the independent United Republic of Somalia in 1960, I love this line. The contrasting traditions became a source of divisive tension, which is a very polite and academic way to say it shouldn't have been a country. We had this clan-based society that was nomadic and agricultural pastoralism, very, very different clan identities. Putting them all together, not so great. Somalia had a 9-year experiment with post-colonial democracy. It lasted from 1960 until 1969, when Major General Siad Barre, seized power in a coup. We talk about coups all the time in Africa. It's a little coup crazy over there. He formed the Supreme Revolutionary Council, which aligned itself with the Soviet Union and denounced the United States' Africa policy as imperialist, which it was, but that doesn't mean we should unite with the Soviet Union. At the same time, Siad set out to radically transform Somali society through, quote-unquote, scientific socialism.
Come again?
Yeah, this is fun. This isn't my Jeopardy fact, but I love this part anyway. It's an ideology that fused Marxism with Quranic interpretation.
No.
So it's basically
That's not gonna work.
It's basically like Islamist Marxism.
No.
Scientific socialism.
Got it. Okay.
Publicly, he claimed to stamp out the clan system, full stop. In practice, all he did was elevate members of his family and his clan to the regime's inner circle. So he was in control from 69-70 to 1991. His reign was horrible. Widespread atrocities, mass violence, displacement, all of those things. And then we now get kind of the post-Siad civil war catastrophe that happened in the 90s. The famine in the 90s, all of this has led to, it's just a real challenging place to govern. I'd love to say that I learned hopeful things about Somalia in terms of its governance. I did not. But I did learn hopeful things in terms of the Somali people. And I loved that the movie we chose to talk about that y'all will see either tomorrow or next on the playlist humanized a lot of what is just a horrible, horrible history of violence and conflict and famine. And yeah, it's just brutal. But lest you think we end on something brutal, we do have our Jeopardy facts for today. Dr. Kristen, would you like to share yours? And then I will share mine.
I would be delighted. So here's what I learned is that frankincense, which is a really, really important scent, odor, thing,
Herb?
incense, for Catholic and Orthodox and high Protestant, like high Anglican folks, actually comes from Somalia, and it is calcified tree sap. And it pretty much only grows in Somalia.
I know. They're like the global producer of frankincense.
Frankincense. Utterly fascinating.
Yeah.
Loved that so much. Had no idea it was calcified tree sap. And I've been, lighting it for years in the urn at church. So fascinating. What about yours?
Mine was this delightful discovery of a new sport. I had never heard of it until we started studying Somalia. Somalia is the only country in Africa with a national bandy team.
Okay.
It is hockey, but with balls, and
Okay.
the goalie doesn't have a stick, but it's on ice, which is hilarious because if you look at a map, you can imagine there's not a lot of ice in Somalia. There isn't.
No.
They practice in Sweden because they don't have ice in Somalia.
Sure. I love humans.
They are the only African country with a bandy team, Bandy. Look up the videos. We've got some in the downstairs in our link to our Google Doc. But go on this YouTube rabbit hole, my friends, because it is joy.
I love it.
I know.
So I think that's it. Tomorrow we're going to be, or next in the playlist, as Aaron already alluded to, we're going to be watching a 2015 film called Men in the Arena, which in the United States is available on Peacock, and is available internationally pretty much as other streaming services. It is the story of two Somali national football team members, and really the idea of football in Somalia and what it kind of means and is and does. It is a sprawling documentary, and we will be talking about it tomorrow. In the meantime, we ask that you do all the YouTube-y things if you enjoyed this video to tell the rest of YouTube that it was worth their time. Like, subscribe. Check out the stuff we have in the downstairs, not only the living Google Doc to everything we find about Somalia, but a chance to sign up for our newsletter, which is our weekly update of what's going on in our world, but also some food for thought. And we often include Colonizer's World Tour facts in there. So we'd love for you to join us there. Whenever we see you next, whether it be the newsletter or the Men in the Arena video, we can't wait. We'll see you then.
Bye.